So, welcome back.
Part 2 of representation series, I guess.
Yes.
In this one, we're going to be talking about positive bisexual representation. So representation that we really enjoyed or that helped us feel better about our bisexuality, I guess. So what is your favourite bi character or bi storyline?
So, one of the characters I did like, so there's two of them actually. They're both within Jane the Virgin. Mainly because it was actually a bisexual man. Look at that. So there was a episode with Jane the Virgin where, so a few episodes prior, Jane the Virgin's childhood sweetheart came back into her life. And there was an episode where they were looking at something on Facebook or something, and her boyfriend, so she got back together with her childhood sweetheart, and they were boyfriend, girlfriend, and he noted that the person on Facebook was his ex, and the ex was a man. So it went into this whole episode where Jane was quite confused about what this meant and what that meant for her, and it was that very typical, like, how to react to bi people kind of trip, where it's like, very much like, oh no, what if they leave me for a man, and that kind of stuff. And they went through it, and they had a part at the end where she asked him all of these questions and all of her concerns, and he settled her concerns in a very positive way, where it kind of went through all of those myths and really dispelled them and really comforted her. So she was then perfectly fine with it. And then it never came up again, which sounds like a bad thing, yeah. But it was actually in a really positive way because it didn't block the relationship, it didn't make the relationship end. It wasn't something that constantly came up where she was like, I knew it, I knew you wouldn't leave me for me. Like, it didn't just come in any way where it was negative. And I think that's kind of what you want from a relationship, right? It's like, you're bisexual, but why does that have to really impact or affect anything? It doesn't really, does it, at the end of it? So I thought that was a really positive representation where it was useful because it dispelled the myths, and it was positive because it didn't then cause any impact. He did then leave the show, but it wasn't because you don't accept me or any kind of that negative stuff. He got a job elsewhere, and so their relationship couldn't work because they couldn't do long distance, and so they split up. But it was a really nice way to sort of bring in someone for a few episodes and have that conversation and then move on from it. What's then great is then one of the main characters, Preta, who is a woman. She was straight for ages, and she was a sort of love rival to Jane, or one of the main characters, Raphael. And she then fell in love with this woman. And they then had that moment of bisexuality's experience where she went through the confusion of what that meant. How could she be in love with a woman when she used to be in love with men? What does that then mean? And again, that would have been a really prime example for them to do a whole straight to gay.
Yeah.
And they didn't. Yeah. They actually didn't for once. And they actually said the word bisexual. So that's multiple times in one show where they've said the word bisexual. And it was really positive because, again, it didn't impact anything in any negative way, because she said that she's bisexual quite off to someone else, and it didn't mean anything to their relationship. Like, the person that she's getting into a relationship with knew that she had children, and she had children with this man, and she was in love with this man, and it didn't affect anything. It was just, oh, we're now in a relationship, and that was perfectly fine. Yeah. There were a few concerns about her still being in love with that man, but that was valid because she was obsessed with this man for so long. It wasn't bisexual tropes of, oh, you're bisexual and you're more likely to go for a man. It was, that was your past love and you're so intrinsically tied to him because you have children with him kind of ideal.
Which I think is important, because if you look at some statistics, a lot of bi women do have children. And I think it's really important to represent bi people as parents. Like, bi parents exist, and it's so uncommon to see that on TV or in the media when queerness is really associated with different types of families, or with being childless, It's actually that's like not the case for a lot of bisexual people, especially older bisexual people. They like are married and they do have children, and that doesn't stop them from being bisexual. I think that's really cool to represent that.
Yeah, and it was great to see it both from a male's perspective and a female's perspective. It was really great to see a bisexual person in a straight or different sex relationship and a bisexual in a same-sex relationship. So it was a lot of different representations all within one show, all done really positively. And I really do thank that show for what it delivered. There is one thing that I will go into, but I will go into that a little bit later. So what about your representations? Which ones do you really like?
I actually created my own litmus test, which I called the Ramirez test, inspired by our queen Sarah Ramirez, who actually retweeted it once. It was awesome. And it's inspired by the Bechdel test, which is a test for how good representation of women is in films. It's actually a test of how much potential there is for lesbian relationships in media. And when I say lesbian relationships, I mean lesbian, like I would normally call same-gender relationships, but I think Alison Bechdel, who created the test, invented it to be specifically for lesbians. Just to be clear on terms. So the test I created was broken down into 3 steps. And so the first step was, can you tell that this character is bisexual or pansexual based just on the media that they're in? So not because like the actors or the writers have said like, oh yeah, they're bisexual outside of it. They have to be shown in the media. The second is their bisexuality or pansexuality played off as a joke or a character flaw? So for example, Elliot from Scrubs or Todd from Scrubs would not pass step 2. And then step 3 is kind of the gold standard of bisexual representation. It's, do they say, I'm bisexual or I'm pansexual in the show? So my favourite example of a character that passes all 3 steps of the Ramirez test is Rosa Diaz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I know Brooklyn Nine-Nine is propaganda, but I'm going to give it a free pass for Rosa Diaz because I think that storyline was like the gold standard of bisexual storylines, especially because Stephanie Beatrice is bisexual herself and she helped to write that storyline for Rosa, and so it's really authentic. And she says she's bisexual, we see her come out like her parents, and she does experience biphobia as well, and I think that's really important because I've seen a lot of representation that is biphobic. I've not seen much representation of characters experiencing biphobia, which I think is important because a lot of people don't know biphobia exists or that it's different from homophobia. I'm sure we'll do an episode on that at some point. But you know, she comes out to her parents and her parents aren't very accepting. They kind of say, well, you can just choose to settle down with a man then. Like, if you like men and women, you can just choose a man. Like, you don't have to be bisexual, which I think is something that a lot of people have experienced.
Yeah, that is exactly what I experienced when I came out.
Yeah, kind of same. But then in like later episodes, she gets a girlfriend. But it's not just like she settles down with one woman and is happy forever. Like she dates a lot of women. And in the future, I'd quite like to see her maybe date a man again and then date a woman, just so it's not like, oh, you date men, you come out, and then you only date women. But hopefully they will do that. But for me, that's like the best bisexual representation that I've seen. And as you were kind of just saying off camera, that's also really great because she herself is bi and she talks about it a lot in the media as well. Yeah,
so this is the thing that I was going to bring up with my 2 representations that I put within Jane the Virgin is, as far as I'm aware, neither one of those people are actually bisexual themselves. And I think the problem is, so I wrote a blog about LGBT plus representation within Hollywood and media. And the thing is we kind of have a very nuanced conversation about this kind of thing, because I do agree that these representations are still important. These representations within Jane the Virgin are still so positive that it's really important that we have them. But I can't help but feeling a little tinge of sadness about the fact that it is played by a straight person. Because I've met people who are LGBT plus and actors, and they are often discriminated against in really weird overlapping ways where they're never good enough for any roles because they're not gay enough for the gay roles somehow. And it's not only on that side, but it's also the way the representation ends within the piece of media itself. So, for example, within Jane the Virgin, like I said, that person left the show, that bisexual man. He left the show, and at that point, that representation was now over. And it's the same thing with Jane the Virgin as a whole. And you could say the same thing if Brooklyn Nine-Nine, if Detective Rosa Diaz was actress Stephanie Burgess was actually straight. Once that show ends, the representation ends. And you can go back and look at it, but there's no representation out there to the public anymore. And I think that's the problem, is that when you have representation that is played by someone who is straight, when the piece of media is over, the representation disappears, and there's nothing for people to look up to or look at anymore. And it's not just with bisexual people, it's with everyone. Because the problem is that then you get this idea that they only exist within this fictional world. That, yeah, bisexual is a thing, but it's in that world, and if you can't see anyone in the actual real life who's actually bisexual and is out there and talking about it, then how are you supposed to know that you can exist and you can pursue these careers and you can be in this space and you can be accepted when you're not seeing it? And I think that was the most positive thing about Detective Rosa Diaz and Stephanie Burgess, is that she came out in the show and she came out in real life and she made numerous articles and entered not just LGBT plus press, but all mainstream press. There were article after article after article coming out about how positive this representation is. And as you were saying off camera, it was really positive because when she then got married to a man, she was like, and I'm still bi. And then there were numerous articles about that in every single press. And she wrote about it herself. So I think that's really great, is that representation isn't over. The other thing that's really great about her representation is it's also a person of colour. So you get that overlapping identities and that intersectionality as well, which is often lacking from a lot of representation. Like Love, Simon was one of the biggest LGBT plus films, but the character's white. And the thing that upset me about that was then the person he gets together with is a person of colour. And they could have told that story instead, and they didn't. Not only was he black, but he was Jewish. To me, that's a more interesting story, and I would love them to do a spin-off on how he dealt with all of that. But
as I mentioned last episode about the Glad We Are on TV reports that show that bi and trans people are really underrepresented in the media, they also do whether characters are white or whether they're like characters of colour. And yeah, LGBT media is so white and it's still so white, and like it's getting better for bi and trans characters, and it is getting slightly better for like people of colour in LGBT media, but like not to the same, like the correlation is not there. It's something that really needs to be worked on. Like those reports are just, it's a whitewash.
Yeah. And I think that's again one of the most positive things about Detective Rosa Diaz. And we definitely need more representation like that.
And I think the same can be said for Sarah Ramirez, who played Callie on Grey's Anatomy, who was a bisexual character, who I think says that she's bisexual. I think she says the B in LGBT doesn't stand for badass, it stands for bisexual and also badass. So that was really awesome to have like a character played by a bi woman, played by a woman of colour, being bisexual. And I think it's about having not just like bi characters on screen or in print, it's about getting bi and all queer people behind that process. So like queer writers, queer directors, because then you get more authentic representation, and you get the representation off screen, where they're in the press or they're being role models. For example, one of my favourite bi books is called Vow of Celibacy, and it was written by a plus size bi woman about a plus size bi character, and it's really great because it's very authentic. Like the bi character, again, she deals with biphobia. For example, she dates a lesbian for a while, and then when they have an argument, the lesbian says to her like, oh, you're just gonna like run back to men, you don't have to face what it really means to like be a dyke. And she's like, I am a dyke. And then the lesbian character is like, you can't say that word because you're not a lesbian, which is a whole thing that we'll do another video on probably. But then she also faces like sexualization of people trying to have threesomes with her. But then she has a threesome with like another couple who don't sexualize her, and they have like a really great time. And it was just really positive. Like, it was such a feel-good book, honestly. When I read it, I was like, oh. And it's because she's a bisexual writer. And so I think that's why it's so important not to just have bi characters, but to have bi creators as well.
Yeah, because it's very much like we should be able to tell our own stories. It shouldn't be down to white cis het men telling all of our stories for us. It should be like LGBT plus and LGBT plus people of colour and bisexual people, and all of the people should be working behind the scenes, creating something that they can relate to and is part of their experience. It's so important, 100%.
Definitely. So are there any other bi characters that you really like?
Wish I could say yes, but unfortunately there's just not that many, is there?
One more that I want to give a special mention to is Eleanor from The Good Place. We kind of had a conversation about this earlier as well, in that I kind of give her a free pass because I really like the show. I think you really like the show.
Yeah.
Great. But her character, they could do so much more with her bisexuality. For example, she never says she's bi. She again just kind of like, you see her like wanting to kiss girls and stuff. And I think there's a lot of like possibility for them to do a flashback on her on Earth, like being with a woman, or even her just saying that she was bi would be great, because like she's with Chidi, no spoilers for anyone who hasn't watched it, but hopefully they end up happy together. But they just haven't explored that enough. But I do like that she's a really laid back character where like her bisexuality doesn't define her and it doesn't make her bad. Like, she's a messy character, and she's a character that goes through a lot of like reformation on the show, but her bisexuality is never treated as something that's like part of her messiness or something that like needs to be reformed for her to be like a good person. It's just part of who she is. Like, in the same way she's blonde, she's also bi, and I really like that. Also the same on Tuca and Bertie. I don't know if you ever watched that. That's also great. Like, they have two bi characters in that. They have a butch bi character, which is amazing. Never get to see butch bi people. The butch bi character is also a bird. All the characters are birds.
Okay.
But you know, she's a great character, and then one of the main characters is also bi, and you kind of explore her bi-ness a bit. And I don't know if Lisa Hanowitz is bi, but she seems it from how authentic this creation is. Also, really great representation of sexual abuse survivors on that show. Recommend it.
But yeah, it's interesting because I love Eleanor and I love The Good Place, but it's really hard to place it as bisexuality because they don't say bisexual at any point. But at the same time, they do show scenes where it's very evident, and it is that idea of, do they have to say the word? Can they not just be showing in different relationships or showing having different attractions and using that as a way to say, well, they're bisexual, they don't have to keep saying it to everyone. But I think it is also the idea of, it's hard to have that nuance when there's not enough, like we were saying earlier, when we don't have enough conversation, it's really hard to have representation that isn't clear representation, because there just isn't enough of it as it is.
Because in real life, you have people like us who are like, we're bi, and we say it constantly. I think I say the word bisexual once a day because I'm a bi activist and it takes up a lot of my time. But then you also have bi people who never say it, or who, you know, it's not a big part of their life. And those stories deserve to be told as much as stories about people for whom being bisexual is like a big part of their life. And again, that's something that could be solved by having more representation.
Yeah, and I feel like with Eleanor, they're the kind of person who probably wouldn't say it all the time because they're so laid back, as you said. and they're not exactly a politically charged person, like, they're a complete mess of a character. There's that one moment where they get very involved about climate change, but apart from that, so they wouldn't be the kind of person to be like, I'm bisexual, and it's really important that you know I'm bisexual. They're just the kind of person who just exists as who they are, and just is quite free about everything. So I feel like the bisexuality plays quite well into our character as well. But yeah, there's not enough conversation to have characters who aren't very clear-cut about their sexuality. Because it then leaves that room for debate, and when you leave room for debate, people are going to straight wash them or gay wash them.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have that representation. People will treat them as one or the other. Since, as you said, they're together with Chidi, they're most likely to be straight washed, and they're most likely to be like, oh, they're attracted to Tahani just because it's Tahani, and it'll just disappear.
Yeah. So going forward then, if we obviously want more representation, for you, what would you like to see more of in terms of bisexual characters?
So I would like I just like more Rosa Diaz's, essentially. I want more LGBT plus people of colour, so I want that intersection. I would like to see more men. I feel like there is a lot of instances or actual representations of women, but like, for example, the one in Jane the Virgin lasts less than a season, so it's not long-standing representation, and I want to see more of that because I don't see anything of myself affected with the media, and I would like it to be more bisexual people, as the characters or behind the scenes, representing themselves properly and making sure it's an authentic experience. How about you?
For me, I would like to see more like bi and non-binary people, like trans and gender fluid characters. But again, there's like so few trans non-binary characters on TV as it is. Like, that's a whole other kettle of fish, really. I would like to see more like gender non-conforming bi characters. Often bi women and lesbians on screen are just like very femme. I'd like to see like more butch bi people, more butch bi lesbians. So yeah, Rosa Diaz, she then goes on to date a character played by Cameron Esposito, who's kind of a butch lesbian and plays like a butch character. So that was really awesome to see like more of that represented on TV.
Yeah.
I'd love to see some more butch and gender non-conforming bi people. Also some more like femme bi men. I think bi men, when they're in TV programs, are often portrayed as like quite masculine, quite like straight-ish.
Yeah.
I don't like that term, but that's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, and I think that's also the great thing about Rosa Diaz is Rosa Diaz was always quite a butch woman anyway.
Yeah.
So, motorcycles and leather jackets and beating everyone up. So the fact that it's that and now it's bisexual is a butch bi representation,
Yeah.
which is great. So yeah, I think we just need more bi.
Give us more.
Give us more. I'm begging you.
So, I think that's what we're going to wrap up with. I hope you enjoyed this series on bi representation.
Tell us yours in the comments below, negative or positive.
Definitely. Tell us your favourite bi character and your least favourite bi character. And also, tell us what else you'd like to see us discuss on the AmBIssadors. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you.
Oh, and like and subscribe.